No one expects to receive a funeral invitation from their own family, especially not after 10 years of silence. When I first saw the envelope, thick and cream-colored, wedged between a stack of store ads and the usual bills, my heart stumbled. My name, Madison Carter, was scrawled in my father's unmistakable, rigid handwriting. It was as if the past had followed me across the Georgia state line and found me, no matter how carefully I tried to tuck it away. I set my work bag down and stood by the kitchen counter, the setting sun painting the linoleum floor gold. For a long moment, I just stared at the letter. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash, unopened, as if I could shut out whatever news it carried the same way I'd shut out everything else from Charleston. But something kept my hand from letting go. Maybe it was the way the envelope felt so out of place in my quiet little world. Or maybe, after a decade, I still wasn't ready to stop being my father's daughter, even if he had stopped being my father. Emma's voice broke my trance. "Mom, did you get something important?" She was standing by the fridge, her after-school snack in hand, 12 years old but already so much older than I had been at that age. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her face bright with curiosity. I managed a smile, but I could feel my fingers trembling as I tore the seal open. Inside, a formal card slid out, embossed with black script. I read the words, twice, before they made any sense. "You are invited to attend the memorial service for Robert Carter." The rest blurred together. The date, the address, my childhood home. The family name, the same one I'd carried even after leaving Charleston, even after leaving everything else behind. I leaned back against the counter, breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Robert Carter, my father, was dead. The man whose approval I'd chased until it broke me. The man who'd turned his back when I needed him most. There was no sadness, not really. Not anger, either. Just a kind of quiet ache that sat in my chest like a stone. I remembered the last time I saw him, his face drawn tight, his voice cold. "You made your bed, Madison. Now you lie in it." Those words still echoed in my head, just as sharp as the day I left. Emma, sensing my shift, came closer. "Mom?" Her voice was soft, careful. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer, not at first. I handed her the invitation and watched as her eyes widened, mouth forming a silent O. She looked at me, really looked, her questions hovering between us. "He's gone," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. Emma sat down beside me at the tiny kitchen table, legs swinging above the scuffed linoleum. For a while, neither of us spoke. The apartment felt smaller than ever, as if the walls themselves were waiting for my reaction. I glanced around at the life we'd built, the bookshelves crammed with library sale finds, the second-hand curtains Emma had picked out, the potted plants stubbornly clinging to the last scraps of autumn sunlight. It was a good life, modest, safe, unremarkable. But it was ours. "I didn't know he was sick," Emma said, voice tentative. Neither did I. I managed to keep my tone even. In truth, I hadn't known much of anything about the Carters for years. Birthdays came and went, holidays slipped past with only a perfunctory card from Linda or Mark. I'd stopped expecting anything from my family a long time ago. Emma twisted the invitation in her hands. "Are we supposed to go?" That question settled between us like dust. I remembered how I'd left Charleston with a split lip and a suitcase full of baby clothes, determined never to look back. My father's words had burned bridges I thought would never be rebuilt. But now, staring at that invitation, I realized the bridges were still there, just hidden under years of silence and shame. I looked at Emma, my reason for leaving, my anchor in every storm. She had her father's eyes, but all of her kindness came from somewhere else. She deserved better than the Carter legacy, and I had tried every day to give her that. Still, there was a part of me that wanted her to know where we came from, even if it wasn't pretty. I don't know, I said honestly. What do you think? Emma hesitated, chewing at her thumbnail. Do you want to go? Did I? I wasn't sure. There was so much tangled up in that question: fear, resentment, unfinished business. I thought about the Carter house, its white columns and ivy-choked porch, the way it always smelled faintly of old wood and secrets. I remembered holidays filled with silver cutlery and forced smiles, Sunday dinners where grace was said through clenched teeth. My family's money was old, their pride older. Every memory was laced with rules, judgments, and silences that cut deeper than any insult. But I also remembered my father's stories when I was young, before everything turned hard. The way he used to toss me in the air and laugh, the bedtime tales he told on long, humid Charleston nights. It was easier to remember the cold, but sometimes, the warmth sneaked in when I least expected. I think, my voice trailed off. What did I think? That I needed closure? That maybe I could face the ghosts and finally move on? I squeezed Emma's hand. Sometimes, we have to face things we'd rather leave behind. Maybe this is one of those times. Emma nodded, her eyes serious. We could go together. If you want. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're braver than you know, kiddo. We sat there for a while longer, the late autumn sunlight sliding down the walls, painting everything in shades of gold and goodbye. I thought of my father's house, how I'd left it behind, never expecting to return. Now, the invitation sat between us like a key to a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. Eventually, I stood and started dinner, hands moving on autopilot as I cooked. Emma set the table, quiet but watchful. Our lives had become a rhythm of small routines: Tuesday meatloaf, Wednesday leftovers, library visits on Saturdays. Safe, predictable. But as the evening wore on, I realized that safety had become another word for hiding. After dinner, Emma helped me pack away the dishes, her movements careful, as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, what if they don't want us there? I paused, a plate in my hand, and looked at her. The truth was, I didn't know. But I thought of something my grandmother used to say: sometimes, the hardest doors to open are the ones that lead home. I guess we'll find out, I said softly, pulling Emma into a hug. For the first time in years, I felt the old weight shifting, just a little. Tomorrow, I would call into work, pull the suitcase from the closet, and pack the clothes I hadn't worn since I left Charleston. We would go back, not because we were wanted, but because some stories can't be left unfinished. As Emma drifted off to bed, I sat at the table, staring at the invitation one more time. The Carter's world, full of traditions, money, and expectations, was waiting. But so was the woman I'd become, and the daughter I'd raised on my own. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for both to meet. Driving into Charleston felt like pressing a bruise I thought had healed. As the miles slipped away beneath the wheels, each familiar highway sign pulled old memories to the surface, memories I'd boxed up and hidden, or so I'd believed. Emma sat beside me in the passenger seat, her knees pulled up and a tattered library book open in her lap, though I doubted she'd read a single page since we left Savannah. I could feel her eyes drifting from the window to my profile and back again, quietly reading the tension in my jaw, the white grip on the steering wheel. The sky was heavy with late fall clouds, the kind that promise rain but never quite deliver. It was the same low country air I'd grown up in, thick, faintly sweet, and heavy with secrets. When we finally turned onto the old oak-lined lane that led to the Carter estate, Emma's fingers found mine across the console, squeezing tight. I managed a smile for her sake, though my heart rattled in my chest. We slowed in front of the house, and for a moment, I let myself just look. The Carter home was exactly as I remembered, white columns standing guard over a deep porch, brick steps trailing with creeping ivy. The windows gleamed in the gray light, immaculate as always, but behind the glass I could see shapes moving, silhouettes pausing to peek out, watching as the prodigal daughter returned. The place was grand, yes, but there was nothing welcoming in its grandeur. It felt more like a monument than a home. Emma's voice was small. "It's big. It's old, too," I said, trying for lightness. "Older than just about everything else in this town." I wanted to tell her about afternoons spent on that porch, about fireflies and lemonade, but the words caught in my throat. Too much history, too much left unsaid. I parked by the side entrance, where guests rarely used to come. As we stepped out, the air was cool and smelled faintly of camellias. Emma kept close to my side, clutching her backpack to her chest. Before we reached the front steps, the door opened, and Linda stood framed in the entryway, her face set in a practiced smile. She was dressed in tasteful black, her hair styled just so. It was the kind of look that said she'd spent all morning getting it right. "Madison," she said, voice pleasant but distant. "You made it." Her eyes flicked to Emma, sizing her up, then returned to me. I offered a polite nod, keeping my grip on Emma's hand. "Linda." My own voice sounded unfamiliar, too formal. Mark appeared behind her, half in the shadows of the hallway. He didn't step forward, just stood with his arms crossed, gaze cold and unblinking. He looked older than I remembered, but there was no warmth in his face. "Hi, Mark," I ventured. He gave the smallest tilt of his chin, nothing more. Linda stepped aside, letting us in. "Come on, everyone's in the sitting room." Inside, the house was spotless and cool, every surface gleaming, the faint scent of polish and old money in the air. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Carters staring out in sepia and black and white. I felt Emma's hand tense again as we passed by photos where her mother was nowhere to be found. The sitting room was crowded with relatives and old friends, faces I half remembered from childhood, now aged and rearranged by time. Conversation dipped as we entered. I caught the flicker of glances, the hush of words meant to sound casual but barbed all the same. "Is that Madison?" someone whispered, too loud to be an accident. "That's her. With the girl." I kept my eyes forward, spine straight. Emma's grip grew tighter. We made our way to the edge of the room, where an empty settee waited, conspicuously set apart from the main cluster of chairs. No one offered a greeting, not even a nod. Instead, Linda moved through the crowd, her smile growing as she received quiet words of sympathy, Mark trailing behind her like a dark cloud. The house was warm, almost stuffy, but it didn't take long for the chill to settle in my bones. Emma leaned against me, her backpack still pressed close, eyes downcast. I wondered what she saw, whether she understood the code of silence, the way people could make you feel small with nothing but a look. A woman I barely remembered, Aunt Ruth, perhaps, brought us tea in delicate cups, her hands careful not to touch mine as she set them down. "Guest rooms all ready," she said, eyes flicking to Linda for approval. "Just down the hall, Madison." "4 appearances, of course." Linda's smile never slipped. "Yes, we thought you and Emma would like your own space." "It's just for the night." I nodded, unable to find the words to thank her or challenge her. Emma looked up at me, silent questions in her gaze. We carried our bags upstairs. The guest room was perfectly made, not a wrinkle in the bedspread, not a book out of place. There were fresh towels and a single vase of white lilies on the dresser, but no sign this was anything other than a room for outsiders. I set Emma's things down by the window, letting her take in the view of the old oak tree that dominated the backyard. She stood at the glass, hands cupped, eyes wide. "Do you think anyone will talk to us?" I knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. "People here are just set in their ways, Em. It's nothing you did." She nodded, but her shoulders stayed hunched. Downstairs, voices rose and fell, the rhythm of old Southern conversation, a drawl, a laugh, a sharp undertone. I remembered how, growing up, these rooms had once felt endless, a maze of secrets and rules. Now, they pressed in close, making me keenly aware of every step, every breath. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, the kind reserved for holidays and funerals, starched linens, candles, too much silverware. Linda presided at the head of the table, Mark at the opposite end, their positions as fixed as the family crest above the mantel. Emma and I were placed halfway down, between two distant cousins who kept up polite, surface-level chatter about the weather and church bazaars. Not once did anyone mention why we were really there. My father's name hovered over the meal like a storm cloud, but nobody dared break the seal. Instead, the talk wound around safe topics: football, fall weather, the price of pecans. I caught Mark's eye once, and he looked right through me, as if I were a stranger on a train. Emma picked at her food, rolling her napkin tight between her fingers. I watched her, wishing I could shield her from the weight in the room. Linda kept her smile in place, doling out praise for the casserole and the pie, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Mark ate in silence, fork scraping the plate. When dessert was cleared, Linda rose from her seat, the room going quiet. She smoothed her skirt and set her napkin on the table, fixing me with a look that was neither kind nor cruel, simply final. "Don't expect anything to change," she said, her voice low but clear. For a moment, every conversation stopped. Then, just as quickly, the hum returned, but the meaning was plain, the boundaries here were drawn deep and wide. Emma and I slipped out as the talk picked up again, finding our way back to the guest room. She sat on the bed, still clutching her napkin, her small face pale. I wanted to tell her that things would be all right, that time softened even the hardest hearts, but tonight, those words felt like a story I wasn't sure I believed. I closed the door softly, the voices of the Carter clan muffled behind heavy wood. Outside, the wind rattled the old oak branches against the window, steady as a heartbeat. Inside, we lay side by side on the two-neat bed, Emma's hand in mine, both of us waiting for morning, and for whatever else might come. The day of the funeral arrived wrapped in heavy gray clouds and heavier hearts. It was as if the world itself wanted to mirror the weight pressing down on me as I helped Emma into her black dress and brushed her hair back from her face. She looked older than 12 in that moment, solemn, wide-eyed, her usual spark dimmed by the gravity of the day. We walked down the wide staircase of the Carter house, our steps muffled by the runner. The kitchen buzzed with quiet activity as relatives prepared to leave, voices hushed and hurried. Mark was already by the front door, straightening his tie in the hall mirror, while Linda stood at the base of the steps, phone in hand, issuing soft instructions to someone on the other end. I nodded a silent greeting, but she only glanced my way before returning to her call. Outside, the air felt damp, the sky a patchwork of steel and pale sunlight. A row of black cars lined the driveway, as if the family had coordinated every detail to perfection. Emma squeezed my hand as we climbed into the back seat of a sedan, assigned to us by Linda's careful orchestration. The ride to the chapel was silent except for the soft sound of Emma's breath and the creak of old leather seats. The chapel was small, one of those brick sanctuaries tucked between ancient oaks, the stained glass windows dull under the overcast sky. When we stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the hush that fell over the room. Conversations faltered as eyes slid toward us, some openly curious, others quickly averted. I felt each glance like a pinprick. We found seats in the last pew, tucked into the shadows at the back of the chapel. From here, I could see the backs of relatives' heads, many I hadn't seen in years, a few I barely remembered at all. Emma sat close, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white against the dark fabric of her dress. The service began with a practiced solemnity. The minister, an old friend of my father's, stood behind the pulpit and spoke in careful, measured tones. He recited the expected prayers and verses, his voice filling the small space with ritual. My father's name was mentioned, of course, but my own was not. There were references to beloved family, dutiful children, and the legacy of Robert Carter, but no one acknowledged the existence of the daughter who had left. I was erased, as cleanly as if I'd never been part of the story. Linda and Mark sat at the front, hands folded, the picture of composed grief. When it was time for eulogies, Linda rose first. Her voice was smooth, every word perfectly chosen. She spoke about my father's generosity, his unwavering principles, the way he led the family through hardship. She talked about the lessons he'd taught her, the pride she felt in carrying his name. There was no mention of conflict, no hint of anything less than a perfect father-daughter bond. Mark followed with a shorter speech, less polished but no less rehearsed. He spoke of family vacations, fishing trips, football games in the backyard. He recounted how their father had taught him about honesty and hard work, and how much he would miss him. The congregation nodded along, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues. As they spoke, I couldn't help but feel the gap between their stories and my own. My memories of my father were more complicated, tangled with longing and disappointment. I remembered his voice sharp as winter, "You made your bed, Madison. Now you lie in it." Even now, those words could still sting, echoing louder than any hymn. The rest of the service blurred past me. There were more prayers, a brief performance of Amazing Grace by a distant cousin, the rustle of programs and the muffled coughs of those impatient to be done. No one called on me to speak, and I did not volunteer. Emma, sensing my sadness, slipped her hand into mine beneath the pew. She leaned against my shoulder, silent and steady. In that moment, I was grateful for her presence, my anchor in the storm. I looked down at her and tried to offer a small, reassuring smile, though my heart felt hollow. When the service ended, people rose in a quiet wave, collecting coats and purses, straightening ties. Most made their way to the front to pay respects to Linda and Mark, offering hugs, kind words, and practiced condolences. A few looked my way, their expressions a mixture of awkwardness and apology, but none approached. One distant cousin offered a brief, stiff nod as she passed my pew before hurrying after her husband. I lingered at the back, waiting until the chapel began to empty. The cold air pressed in, mingling with the scent of lilies and candle wax. I stood, smoothing my dress, and waited for Emma to gather her things. As we made our way down the aisle, I kept my gaze ahead, avoiding the eyes that followed us. Near the door, Mr. Tracy Dawson, the family lawyer, stood in a tailored dark suit, his silver hair neat, his expression unreadable. He greeted Linda and Mark first, exchanging a few words and a firm handshake. Then, as Emma and I passed, he turned to me with a slight nod. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, so only I could hear. "Your father left instructions. I'll need to see you after the reception." His words startled me, but before I could respond, he was already moving away, ushering the rest of the family outside. Emma and I stepped into the courtyard, the clouds now threatening rain. The rest of the family clustered in small groups, their voices low and indistinct. Linda was surrounded by a knot of well-wishers, her face a mask of poised sorrow. Mark stood nearby, talking with an uncle I barely recognized. No one approached us. We waited at the edge of the crowd until it was time to return to the house for the reception. The short ride back was silent. I watched the raindrops start to gather on the windows, each one a tiny mirror of the ache inside me. Back at the Carter house, guests filtered in, their laughter and conversation growing louder as they escaped the gloom of the chapel. I felt like a ghost in my own childhood home, unseen, unacknowledged, except for the occasional polite nod from someone who could not quite remember my name. Emma stood at my side, her hand curled around my wrist. I glanced down at her and felt a pang of gratitude. In a room full of family, she was the only one who made me feel less alone. As the reception continued, I moved through the familiar rooms, noting how little had changed. The polished wood floors, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hall, the portraits watching from their places on the walls. I remembered running through these rooms as a child, laughter ringing through the halls, long before the silences began. After an hour, most of the guests had gathered in the dining room for coffee and cake. I found a quiet corner in the back parlor, needing space to breathe. Emma sat beside me, her face pressed to the cool window glass. Outside, the sky darkened, and rain began to fall in earnest. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it all, the grief, the anger, the emptiness left in the wake of a man who could never quite see me. My father's words lingered, but so did a deeper question: what would it take to finally let go? I closed my eyes, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and conversation, the life of the Carter family rolling on, with or without me. Tomorrow, I would face whatever Mr. Dawson needed to tell me. But tonight, I held Emma close, grateful for the quiet comfort of her small hand in mine, the only warmth in a house that had long since grown cold. A house full of people can feel emptier than being alone. As the Carter mansion filled with the sound of distant cousins and old friends, laughter echoing through the rooms, I found myself shrinking into the edges, there, but not present, like a ghost slipping along the baseboards. Emma hovered near me at first, her hand tight in mine, but curiosity eventually drew her across the parlor to a side table stacked with sweets and slices of pound cake. The air was thick with chatter, the kind that comes after funerals, a forced gaiety, each voice pitched just a little too loud. Linda and Mark moved among the guests like hosts at a gala, their laughter rehearsed, every gesture perfectly placed. If I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine I wasn't here at all. No one approached us with more than a brief, hollow smile. Instead, their eyes would dart away, whispers rippling in our wake. I heard my name once, twice, soft as a sigh, sharp as a warning. I remembered gatherings like this when I was a child, standing just outside the circle, never quite sure where to place myself. Even then, I felt more like a spectator than a participant, measuring every word, every smile, as if I might tip the balance the wrong way. I glanced around the parlor, taking in the details that had not changed, a mantel crowded with porcelain birds, the faint scent of lemon polish, and along the walls, the family photographs. Frames in gold and dark wood lined the paneling, each one a monument to Carter history. There were wedding portraits, birthday parties, summers at the lake. I searched for a younger version of myself, a reminder that I had once belonged here. But the faces stared back, familiar and foreign, and in every frame, I was absent. Emma, tracing the gallery with her eyes, paused before a photo of Linda in her graduation gown, Mark in Little League uniform, my father posed with his hand on their shoulders. She looked over at me, puzzled, and I saw the question in her expression. I gave her a small, sad smile and shrugged. Gerald Adams, our old neighbor, found me standing by the bay window, a plate of untouched cake in my hand. He was older than I remembered, his hair gone completely white, but his eyes were gentle as ever. "Madison," he said, voice low enough to escape notice. "You holding up?" I managed a thin smile. "Doing my best." He leaned in, glancing to make sure no one was listening. "Your daddy, he wasn't always good at saying what needed saying." Don't let these folks tell you where you belong. His words, so simple and kind, were like cool water on a burn. I felt something loosen in my chest. Before I could respond, Linda swept across the room, her heels clicking sharp on the hardwood. She paused beside me, her arm brushing my sleeve as she leaned in, eyes bright with a private warning. "Don't get comfortable," she hissed, the smile never leaving her lips. "None of this is yours." Then, with a toss of her head, she moved on, laughter trailing behind her like perfume. I stood there for a moment, heat rising in my face, fingers tightening around the plate until my knuckles ached. Emma, watching from across the room, looked ready to come to my side, but I shook my head gently. She needed to see me stand my ground, even if I was shaking inside. The party wore on. Trays of cookies were passed, glasses filled and emptied. I retreated to a quiet corner with Emma, watching as the conversations rolled on without us. Emma pulled out her sketchpad, a habit she'd developed for moments when words felt unsafe. She began drawing, tongue between her teeth, her pencil moving across the page with quick, sure strokes. As guests began to trickle out, coats and umbrellas in hand, Gerald slipped close again. He pressed a folded note into my palm, his voice barely above a whisper. "See me tonight. There's more you need to know." He squeezed my hand once before moving away, blending back into the swirl of relatives. I unfolded the paper just enough to glimpse the tidy script, Gerald's handwriting, careful and steady. My heart beat faster. For a moment, hope flickered at the edges of my doubt. When Emma finished her drawing, she handed it to me without a word. It was a family scene, Linda, Mark, my father, even Emma herself. And there, just to one side, she'd drawn me. For the first time, I was not invisible, not missing from the picture. I traced the lines with my finger, gratitude and sadness washing over me in equal measure. That night, as we climbed the stairs to the guest room, the laughter faded behind closed doors. Emma tucked her sketchbook under her pillow and curled against my side, her breathing slow and even. I listened to the quiet tick of the hallway clock and wondered what secrets Gerald meant to share, and whether, at last, they might offer a way back in from the cold. Some secrets demand to be spoken, even after death. That thought ran through my mind as I lay in the darkness of the Carter guest room, listening to Emma's steady breathing. The hush of the big house seemed to throb with all the things left unsaid over the years, as if the walls themselves were tired of secrets. The note from Gerald Adams felt heavy in my pocket. "See me tonight. There's more you need to know." I waited until the laughter and footsteps faded down the hall, until I was sure everyone else had gone to bed. Emma had curled into her pillow, her sketchbook tucked beneath her arm, the soft rise and fall of her chest calming me. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, slipped on my sweater, and eased quietly from the room. The hallway was cool and dim, the floor creaking beneath my bare feet. I padded downstairs, pausing once at the window to make sure no one else was awake. Outside, the air was damp, the world wrapped in that southern darkness that holds its breath until dawn. I slipped out the side door and made my way along the old flagstone path, the porch light guiding me past the garden and toward the cottage at the edge of the property. Gerald's cottage was small and warmly lit, an island of comfort on the sprawling Carter estate. I knocked gently. He opened the door with a knowing look, stepping aside so I could enter. "Evening, Madison," he said softly, motioning me to a battered armchair. "Didn't mean to pull you out so late. Just seemed better this way." The room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon oil. On the mantel sat photos of Gerald's own family, grown children, grandkids I'd never met. There was a quiet honesty to the space, a sense of life well lived. He poured a cup of tea and handed it to me, then sat across, elbows on his knees. I suppose you wonder why I called you over, he began. It's about your father, and you, too. I nodded, hands warming around the mug. He let out a slow breath. For years, after you left Charleston, I delivered money to your daddy. Cash, checks, sometimes a note, always in your handwriting. He'd never say much. Sometimes he'd thank me, sometimes he'd just nod. But he took it, every time. I stared at him, my heart hammering. You knew? Gerald nodded. He knew, too. First time I handed him that envelope, he looked at the handwriting and just stopped. Didn't open it until I'd gone. I'd find him later, sitting on the porch, letter in his hand, staring out at the yard. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness, relief that my efforts had reached him, sadness that we'd both been too proud or too stubborn to reach across the gap between us. Why didn't he ever write back? Or call? My voice cracked. Gerald shook his head. Your father was a hard man, Madison. Stubborn as the day is long. But not blind. I saw him change, little by little, these past few years. After he got sick, he started talking more, about you, about Emma. Asked about your life in Savannah. I think he just didn't know how to make it right. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope, edges worn, my name written on the front in my father's bold, careful hand. He wrote this a while ago. Never mailed it. Asked me to hold on to it. Said maybe, if you ever came back, it would be time. I took the letter, hands shaking. For a moment I just held it, staring at the familiar writing. The sense of being a daughter, of belonging, warred with years of anger and hurt. Gerald watched me, kindness in his eyes. You read it here, if you like. I'll step outside. When he'd gone, I opened the envelope. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. Madison. I don't know how to begin this, except to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now I was just angry and afraid. I was proud, and it cost me my family. When you left, I told myself you'd come back one day, but I didn't know how to ask you to. I watched from a distance as you built your life. Gerald told me you were safe, that Emma was growing strong. I never stopped being your father, even if I didn't act like it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I love you, and I always did, even when I failed to show it. Dad. I read the letter twice, tears blurring the words, until the ache in my chest finally eased. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, hadn't tried to erase the pain, just told the truth as best he could. I sat there a long time, the house quiet around me, letting his words settle. Grief is a funny thing, sometimes sharp and loud, sometimes quiet as dust. In that moment, it was both, folding anger and longing together with something that almost felt like healing. When I finally left Gerald's cottage, the first edge of morning was touching the horizon. I tucked the letter into my pocket and made my way back along the path, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. As I slipped inside the Carter house, I found Emma still asleep, her face peaceful in the early dawn. I lay beside her, the letter pressed between my hands, and closed my eyes for a few minutes, letting the quiet settle in my bones. A sudden knock startled me. I sat up, heart racing. The door creaked open and Mr. Dawson, the family lawyer, appeared in the doorway, his expression grave but not unkind. It's time, he said quietly. The will is being read in the morning. I nodded, slipping the letter beneath my pillow. In that small, ordinary moment, I realized my father had known about my life all along. Maybe he never truly hated me, maybe he was just as lost as I was. And maybe, for the first time, it was possible to imagine a way forward. Emma stirred beside me, blinking in the dawn light. I brushed her hair back, whispering that it was almost morning, almost time. Tomorrow, the past would be aired at last, and with it, maybe, the first real chance to lay it down. The truth has a way of making even the proudest houses tremble. That morning, the Carter mansion felt like it was holding its breath. The storm from the night before had left everything washed clean, the sky outside pale and sharp, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Doors opened and shut with a little more force than usual. Even the scent of coffee seemed tinged with anticipation. I helped Emma dress, smoothing the hem of her skirt and brushing her hair so it fell neat around her shoulders. She seemed quiet, but not afraid. Something had shifted in her, a small, growing sense of belonging. She looked up at me while I fastened the last button on her blouse. "Maybe Grandpa left something just for us, Mom," she said, hope flickering in her eyes. I didn't answer right away, afraid to hope with her. But I kissed her forehead and squeezed her hand. Downstairs, the parlor was already filling. Linda swept in, hair immaculate, her black dress ironed to perfection. Mark followed, his posture rigid, jaw set, looking like he'd spent the night steeling himself for battle. Other relatives gathered in clusters, voices hushed, glances flickering between Linda and Mark, then toward Emma and me. We took seats at the edge of the room, half in shadow. Mr. Dawson entered last, carrying a leather folder and a small cedar box. His presence was quiet but commanding, something about the way he carried himself made even the proudest Carter look up. Linda broke the silence first. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice edged with impatience. Mark muttered agreement, arms crossed. The whole room seemed to tense, as if bracing for a blow. Mr. Dawson held up a hand. "Thank you for gathering. Before we address any legal matters, it was Robert's express wish that you all watch this." He set the cedar box on the coffee table and opened it with care, withdrawing a thumb drive. He connected it to the television, and suddenly all eyes were on the black screen. There were protests, Linda huffed, Mark grumbled, but Mr. Dawson's calm gaze stilled them. He pressed play. The screen flickered, then steadied, and there was my father, Robert Carter, sitting at his old oak desk. He looked older, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes, so familiar, were clear. He spoke slowly, every word chosen, the southern drawl softened by age. "If Madison is watching this, then I need to say a few things I should have said a long time ago." His voice caught a little, and the room seemed to shrink around us. He turned to the camera, looking right at me. "Madison, I was wrong. I judged you for leaving when I didn't understand. I told myself I was teaching you about consequences, but really, I was just angry. You walked away from pain, and you built something better. I let my pride speak louder than my love, and for that, I am sorry." A hush settled over the room. Emma's hand found mine, her finger small and warm. My father went on, his gaze softer now. "To Emma, who I never really got to know, thank you for loving your mom so well. Madison, you sent money all those years, no recognition, no credit, just care. Even when I gave you nothing, you never stopped being my daughter." There was a sharp exhale from the sofa. "Linda," I thought, though I didn't look. "I changed my will," my father continued, his voice steadier now. "This house, and what's left of what I have, will go to Madison and Emma. Not because they asked, but because they gave. To Linda and Mark, I leave the family albums, my old compass, and the Bible my mother gave me. Let these remind you of where you come from." A gasp rippled through the room. Mark's fists clenched in his lap, face darkening. Linda went pale, lips pressed in a hard line. "I hope one day you can forgive me, Madison. I am proud of you, of the woman and mother you became, even when I wasn't watching." The screen faded to black. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the television. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat, reading from the legal papers. Per Robert Carter's final will and testament, effective immediately, the Carter estate and assets are transferred in full to Madison Carter and her daughter, Emma Carter. Linda and Mark Carter are to receive the items detailed in Robert's letter. No one spoke. I felt the air thicken around me, 100 eyes burning holes in my back. I wanted to breathe, but the shock sat heavy in my chest. Linda was first to react, pushing herself up from the sofa, face flushed with disbelief. "This isn't right," she whispered, voice trembling. Mark's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, shoulders squared in silent fury. Relatives stared, some at me, some at the floor. Emma pressed herself against my side, her hand tight around mine, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I saw no fear in her face. Only quiet certainty, as if she'd known all along. I sat still, heart pounding, every emotion tangled, relief, grief, guilt, and something like freedom. The Carter mansion, built on old money and older secrets, suddenly felt changed, the ground beneath us shifting. Mr. Dawson gathered his papers, businesslike as ever. "If there are any questions, you can address them with me privately. Otherwise, the matter is settled by law." No one moved. The silence was immense. As Emma and I rose to leave the room, she looked up at me, her eyes steady. I squeezed her hand, feeling something loosen inside, a knot I hadn't realized I'd carried for years. Linda's face remained white, Mark's fists still tight. But for me, the moment felt less like an ending and more like the first uncertain step toward something new. The air in the parlor crackled with disbelief as my father's words echoed off the walls, hanging there long after the video went black. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as if the entire Carter mansion had been struck by lightning, time stilled, voices stolen, every face fixed in shock. I sat perfectly still, hands clenched in my lap, Emma pressed close beside me. Her small hand found mine, and I could feel her searching my face for clues. Did this mean what she thought it meant? The hush in the room was so deep, I could hear the ticking of the old clock in the hall. Mr. Dawson, ever composed, cleared his throat and set the legal documents on the coffee table, the gesture breaking the spell. "As per the recorded wishes and legally binding documents of Robert Carter, I will now formally read the details of the will." His voice was precise, firm, cutting through the haze. He read in measured tones, "To my daughter Madison Carter and her daughter Emma, I leave the Carter estate, house, land, and all remaining savings and assets." Each word landed like a pebble dropped in water, sending silent ripples through the assembled family. "To my children Linda and Mark Carter, I leave the family photo albums, my old compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother." A gasp traveled the length of the parlor. I felt eyes on me, some wide with disbelief, others narrowed in accusation, and still others fixed on the floor, ashamed to look at all. Linda's jaw dropped, her lips working soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. "This is a mistake," she spat, standing so abruptly her chair nearly toppled. "You tricked him, Madison. There's no way he would do this, not to us, not after everything." Her voice quivered with rage and disbelief. "You must have manipulated him. Did you threaten him? What did you say?" Mark's face was thunderous. He shot to his feet as well, fists clenched, eyes blazing. "We want a recount," he demanded, turning on Mr. Dawson. "Show us the papers. There's no way Dad was in his right mind." Mr. Dawson met his glare without flinching. "Your father's will was reviewed and notarized 2 years ago, at which point he was declared of sound mind by 2 independent witnesses and his physician. The documents are airtight, Mark. There will be no recount, no contest. These are your father's final wishes. A wave of angry murmurs broke out among the relatives. I saw a cousin whisper behind her hand, her gaze darting nervously between me and Linda. An older uncle looked at me with something like pity before turning away. Across the room, an aunt stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Some faces glared, others burned with curiosity or disappointment, a few, quietly, just looked sad. Linda rounded the table, her shoes clicking sharply on the floor. She stopped in front of me, trembling. You think this makes you family again? After all these years? Her words were soft, but I heard the venom underneath. You don't deserve any of this. Not the house. Not the money. Not the Carter name. Mark's anger was colder, controlled but sharp. We'll see you in court. This isn't over, he growled, leaning so close I could smell the bitterness in his breath. We'll fight this until the end. I tried to meet their eyes, but my heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. For a moment, I wondered if they were right, if maybe I didn't deserve anything but the blame they were so eager to give. But then Emma squeezed my hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine with such steady faith that something inside me steadied, too. In the background, Mr. Dawson continued gathering his things, unbothered by the rising storm of voices. If anyone wishes to pursue legal action, you are free to do so, he said, but the will is ironclad. My office has copies on file with the county and the family's financial institution. There is nothing to challenge. He met Linda's gaze with a calm finality. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. Linda faltered, tears starting to well in her eyes. She swiped them away, refusing to look at me. Mark paced the edge of the room, muttering to himself, knuckles white. Around us, relatives began to shift and murmur, some collecting coats and quietly slipping from the room. The party atmosphere from the night before was gone, replaced by a chill that ran deeper than the November air outside. Emma leaned against me, her voice a hopeful whisper, we can finally go home, Mom? I blinked at her, feeling the tears rise unbidden. I think we can, honey, I managed, though the meaning of home had changed so much in just a few days. The rest of the family kept their distance. The inheritance, the will, the money, these things had always been the glue and the curse in Carter history. Now, that bond was broken, and the fracture was as plain as the anger on Linda and Mark's faces. I sat in stunned silence, barely hearing the rest of Mr. Dawson's closing remarks. The house, the land, the money, they meant something, yes, but it was the apology in my father's video that echoed loudest in my heart. The weight of all those years of silence and pain felt lighter now, if only a little. Linda gathered her things, her anger spent, and left the parlor without another word. Mark lingered, glaring at me, then leaned in close so that only I could hear, "This isn't over." His throat wasn't a shout, it was a promise, low and steady, meant to follow me wherever I went. But as he left, Emma put her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes, trusting me to carry her forward. The room slowly emptied, leaving only me, Emma, and the scent of old wood and fresh uncertainty. I wasn't sure what would come next. I only knew that for the first time in a decade, the Carter house felt like it might truly belong to us. After the storm, all that's left is the mess, and the people who stayed. By late afternoon, the Carter mansion was quieter than I'd ever known it. The grand rooms echoed with the ghosts of voices that had filled them just hours before, arguments, accusations, the sharp thud of chairs pushed back and doors swinging shut. Now, there was only the low hum of the heater, the distant tick of the hall clock, and the gentle sound of Emma's footsteps padding through the upstairs hallway. Most of the relatives had packed their bags and left, heads down, conversations clipped and awkward as they said quick goodbyes. The clatter of car doors and the rumble of engines pulling away faded into the cold air outside. Even Linda and Mark had vanished without another word, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their anger, like a storm that had passed but not forgotten. For a long while, Emma and I wandered the house together, our steps slow and tentative. The mansion felt strange, at once emptier, but somehow less hostile. Sunlight crept through the windows, casting long bars across the floor. The parlor was neat again, the documents from the will reading gone, the cedar box packed away. Only the bruised energy of everything that had happened lingered, like a memory you couldn't quite shake. Emma was the first to break the silence. "Can we look around?" she asked, eyes bright with curiosity and something else, an urge to claim this strange new space. I nodded, and together we traced old paths, the kitchen with its echo of cinnamon, the back porch creaking in the breeze, the library where the smell of leather-bound books felt almost comforting. Emma lingered near a set of drawers by the stairs, her fingers tracing the brass handles. "Mom," she called, voice muffled as she bent to open one of the drawers. "There's something here." I knelt beside her and watched as she pulled out a heavy, dust-covered album. Its leather cover was worn, the gold edging faded. She opened it carefully, page by page, the air smelling of must and forgotten years. Near the back, tucked between two pages, was a photograph, one I'd never seen before. It was of me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in the backyard with my father, both of us beaming in the sunlight. Emma's eyes widened. "You were here all along," she whispered. For the first time I felt seen, not by the house, or the family, but by my own child. Gerald Adams arrived just as the sun began to dip. He came through the side entrance, carrying a brown bag of groceries. "Brought you a few things," he said, voice soft, eyes crinkling with concern. "Figured you might not want to deal with the store yet." I offered him a tired smile and gestured to the living room. Emma disappeared upstairs with her newfound album while Gerald and I sat among the late afternoon shadows. "You all right?" he asked after a while. I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my chest. "I don't know," I admitted. It all happened so fast. One minute, I'm invisible. The next, it's all ours. I looked around, the scale of the inheritance settling on my shoulders like a weight. "I'm not sure I know how to be the person who stays." Gerald nodded, his expression gentle. "You've always been the person who showed up, Madison. Maybe not the way they wanted, but you never left anyone behind." He set his hand over mine, steady and warm. "Your father, he saw that, in the end. And he was proud, even if he never found the words." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but this time I didn't turn away. There was a strange comfort in knowing that someone else had witnessed my father's change of heart, however late it had come. After Gerald left, the house grew quiet again. Emma spent the evening sketching at the big kitchen table, crayons scattered around her. She held up her drawing for me to see, a picture of the house, sunlight streaming from every window. She'd labeled it, in careful block letters, home. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to feel the comfort in that word, not just the history. But as I moved from room to room that night, the mansion felt both won and lost, filled with echoes of old expectations and new uncertainty. The master bedroom, the study, even the garden outside all seemed to hold their breath, waiting for me to decide if I would belong. Sleep came slowly. I sat in my father's old chair by the window, the letter he'd written to me tucked into my hand. I watched the darkness slip in, remembered the man he'd been, the sharp words, the rigid rules, the distance, and the man he'd become at the end, willing to apologize, to change, even if only in his final days. Forgiveness is a journey, not a single act. That night, I realized I wasn't finished walking it, not yet. But maybe, In this empty, echoing house, I could take the first real step. In the pale blue morning, a courier arrived. The knock startled me from a restless doze. I opened the front door to find a young man in a crisp suit, a large envelope in his hand. "For Ms. Madison Carter," he said, and left before I could ask questions. Inside was a letter from a law firm, representing Linda and Mark. They were contesting the will. My hand shook as I read it, but there was no anger, just a weary understanding. The past doesn't let go easily. Emma came into the room, sleepy-eyed, her arms filled with drawings. "Mom, can we have pancakes?" she asked, as if nothing in the world had changed. I smiled at her and set the letter aside. "Yes, sweetheart. I think we can." The house felt lighter with her there, her hope, her faith, her art claiming each space as her own. Whatever storm was coming next, we would face it together. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, this place really could become home. There's always another battle when money is involved, but some wars aren't worth fighting. That truth echoed in my head as I sat across from Mr. Dawson at his law office, the steady tick of the wall clock marking the minutes of another gray Charleston morning. He'd offered coffee, which I accepted mostly for something to hold, and Emma sat beside me in a borrowed chair, drawing quietly on the back of a legal pad. Mr. Dawson glanced up from a thick file, his expression steady. "You're protected, Madison. The will is clear, witnessed, and filed by the book. I've seen families try to contest less. Linda and Mark don't have a case. Their lawyer is making noise, but it won't go anywhere." I nodded, my fingers wrapped tight around the paper cup. "They're sending letters." "Threats, mostly." He smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "That's what people do when they lose control. Just let me handle the paperwork. You focus on what matters now." But what did matter? The house, with its promise and pain, felt more like a battlefield than a home some days. There was relief, yes, knowing we were safe, knowing Robert's final wish had been honored, but there was also the fresh ache of conflict, this time played out through attorneys and registered mail instead of whispered words over Sunday dinner. The letters from Linda and Mark's lawyer arrived almost daily. Each was more aggressive than the last, accusations, questions, bolded legal threats. I read them at the kitchen table, heart racing, before handing them to Mr. Dawson. He would shake his head, scribble a quick reply, and slide them into his file. Linda and Mark themselves never called. Their anger, distilled into legalese, was cold but persistent. It reminded me of something my father had said in the video, "Let them remember who stayed quiet but never stopped loving." That line echoed in my heart as I tried to hold on to dignity and patience, to keep from being dragged into a fight I didn't want. I spent nights lying awake in the Carter house, Emma asleep beside me, wondering if it would ever feel like ours. The rooms were big and echoing, the garden tangled with the last of the autumn leaves. Some mornings I thought about selling, just walking away, letting the house become another story, another cautionary tale. We could start over somewhere smaller, somewhere simple. But every time I considered it, I saw Emma's face, bright and hopeful, as she named each room, as she drew pictures for the empty walls. One afternoon, as we walked through the sunlit kitchen, Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, can I invite my friends from Savannah to come visit?" The question stopped me. I thought of our old apartment, the cozy routine we'd built, the neighbors who'd become almost family. "Of course," I said, surprised at how easily the answer came. "This can be home for them too, if you want." Her smile was all the reassurance I needed. A week later, I drove back to Savannah to clear out the last of our things. The apartment was smaller than I remembered, sunlight pooling on the scuffed floorboards, boxes lined up by the door. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting memories wash over me. Emma's first steps across the carpet, dinners for two at the little table, laughter on rainy nights. I packed the rest of our life into the trunk of the car, books, framed photos, Emma's old soccer trophy, and locked the door one final time. The drive back to Charleston was bittersweet. I had spent so many years running from the Carter name, from the history and the hurt. Now, that same name was on the deed in my purse, and the house, its windows bright with late autumn sun, waited for us like a question still unanswered. That evening, as I unpacked the last box in the kitchen, Emma was already planning where to hang her drawings. "Here," she said, pointing to the empty wall by the stairs. "That's where our family goes." I hugged her, gratitude and sorrow tangled together in my chest. The house felt lighter already, less a fortress, more a place of possibility. The legal threats kept coming, but each one felt less threatening. Mr. Dawson called with updates, always calm, always certain. "Let them make noise," he said. "You're protected, Madison." But the truth was, the real fight was inside me, the urge to defend myself, to prove I deserved any of this, and the deeper urge to just let go. Not every war needs a victor. Some only need someone willing to set down the weapons and walk away. It was almost dusk when the doorbell rang. Emma peeked out from behind the staircase as I wiped my hands and went to answer. Standing on the porch, raincoat clutched and eyes rimmed red, was Linda. She didn't look angry, just exhausted. For a moment, she stood there, struggling to speak. "Can we talk?" she finally whispered, her voice ragged. Before I could answer, Emma slipped past me, her arms full of papers. "I made this for you," she said, handing Linda a drawing, a family portrait, childlike and bright, with Linda, Mark, Grandpa Robert, and me all standing together in front of the big house. Linda stared at it, lips trembling. She dropped to one knee and pulled Emma into a sudden hug. For a second, the world stood still, the battles, the anger, all suspended as hope flickered in the lamplight. I watched them, a knot of old pain loosening in my chest. Some wars weren't worth fighting. Some families only needed a second chance. As the door closed behind us, and Linda sat down at the kitchen table for the first time in years, I felt the house settle around us, a little less heavy, a little more like home. Sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one you give yourself. That thought settled quietly in my mind as I watched Linda sit at my kitchen table for the first time in years, her hands wrapped tight around a chipped mug. It was early winter, a chill in the air that seemed to seep through even the thickest walls of the old house. Outside, bare branches scratched gently at the window. Inside, the silence between us was full of words unsaid. Linda looked older in this light, the sharpness in her face softened by exhaustion and something like humility. I poured coffee, set down a plate of cookies Emma had made, and waited. She cleared her throat. "I almost didn't come today," she admitted, staring at the mug. "I thought if I walked through this door, it would mean admitting I lost." I shook my head. "No one won, Linda. We just survived." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. That's what I realized on the drive over. I spent so long being angry. At you, at Dad, at myself. When you left, it felt like you took all the light with you. Then Dad, he shut down, and I was the one left to hold the pieces together. I didn't know how. Old wounds reopened, slow and painful. "I'm sorry for leaving you with that," I said softly. But I couldn't stay. I had to protect Emma, and myself. I hoped you'd understand, someday. Linda's eyes were wet. "I used to blame you for everything. But now, I just miss having a sister. Maybe we were both lost. We sat there, the silence broken only by the tick of the kitchen clock and Emma's laughter drifting from the hallway. My regrets and hers filled the air, but for the first time, we let them breathe. I don't know how to start over, Linda whispered. Maybe we don't have to start over, I said. Maybe we just start from here. Emma wondered and then, flour dusted on her cheeks, holding a tray of cookies. We made these for you, Aunt Linda. They're peanut butter, your favorite, right? Linda blinked, surprised. She reached for one, biting back tears. Thank you, sweetie. The kitchen filled with the small, hopeful warmth of new beginnings. Gerald stopped by briefly, dropping off firewood and a few kind words. He squeezed my shoulder on his way out, his approval silent but sure. As the afternoon faded, Linda and Emma laughed together over a batch of slightly burnt cookies, and I watched them, my heart aching with a hope I hadn't dared feel in years. Later, as I stood on the porch, a hush fell. Tiny flakes of snow drifted down, swirling softly in the air. The first snow in years, dusting the garden and roof in gentle white. I wrapped my arms around myself and let the cold, clean air fill my lungs. Inside, Linda helped Emma hang her latest drawing on the fridge, a new family portrait, with all of us standing together. Not perfect. Not what we once were. But maybe, finally, what we needed to become. I remembered my father's words in his letter, I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe it was possible. Not a family replaced, but a family redefined, one small act of grace at a time. Looking out the window as the snow settles quietly over the old house, I feel a peace I never expected to find. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come in a grand moment, it unfolds slowly, in the small kindnesses we offer each other, and in the courage to let go of old pain. Family, I've learned, isn't just about sharing a name or a home, but about finding the strength to begin again, even when the past feels heavy. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll share your own thoughts or memories below. In this life, the more we open our hearts, the more we realize, there's always a way back to love.